In the mid-90s, executives from the clothing label Fila flew from Italy to New York to meet with a new designer. When they arrived, sitting in the boardroom was a black man wearing cargo shorts and a t-shirt. They told him to wait outside because they had scheduled a meeting with their new partner. The man waited outside and once the room was full, introduced himself. He was their new partner. This awkward situation happened to Tony Shellman, co-founder of the fashion label Enyce, or NYC, some people call it. The brand became the clothing of choice for Jay-Z, Eminem, and Busta Rhymes, but for whatever reason, it just fizzled out. The story of Enyce begins with the friendship of Tony Shellman and Lando Felix, who both came from Madrona in Seattle. They were both into fashion and, like many people, worked in fashion outlets for discounts. Lando said, "Tony made me work at Zebra. Then, what I thought was a cool way to get discounts slowly started becoming my career." Even while working at a clothing store together, it was clear that these guys were set for business. Because of the lack of sales the store did on Sundays, Tony and Lando came up with Movie Matinee Sunday. In an interview with the New York Times, Tony said, "For $5, kids would get into the store and get a 5% discount on clothes. We showed hit movies like Purple Rain. We went from doing $1,600 on Sunday to doing 10 grand. When their boss found out about this, they thought they were going to be fired. Instead, they got promoted to a much bigger store in Seattle." Tony moved to New York to study at Parsons School of Design, and Lando followed the exact same path a year later. After graduating, they both got jobs at a major clothing brand named International News, but Tony at this time was merely folding clothes and wanted to become a sales assistant. Tony's boss, Evan Davis, told Tony to go to the Bronx and see if he could get any orders. Davis was hoping to teach Tony a lesson about just how difficult selling was, but realized Tony came back with two $20,000 orders for clothes. In 1994, Tony decided to start his own clothing company, with Lando and Evan agreeing to pursue this with him. Shellman was experienced at marketing, Felix was good at production, and Davis concentrated on the finances. The company was known as Mecca, and International News financed the project. This streetwear label was an instant success, and they sold $20 million worth of clothing in 3 seasons. According to Felix, Mecca started with a revelation. Kids were getting their looks from different stores: shoes from Foot Locker, baggy jeans at Nordstrom, funky tops from some streetwear boutique. We knew we could do an integrated line and make it logo driven with a sporty flair. The only issue was what was coming from higher up. According to Tony, we did it for 2 years, but then International News wanted to put the name Mecca on anything: socks, jewelry, cologne. That's not what we wanted, so we sold Mecca to them. They soon started the confusingly titled Enyce. It's meant to be a phonetic spelling of NYC, but with a Latin twist. Felix said it's kind of like having a secret because no one ever really says it right. Because of the success with Mecca, many other clothing companies wanted to work with them and finance Enyce. And this is where he had an incredibly memorable meeting where executives from Fila told him to wait outside. Speaking about this moment in the New York Times, he said, "They all felt terrible and apologized, but it just spoke to my philosophy to be yourself, wear your own suit." The label did not have any endorsements or sponsorships from celebrities and aimed to grow organically. But in November 1998, they got as big a brand endorsement as they could get. Jay-Z was photographed outside the Lanesborough Hotel in London by Derek Santini wearing an Enyce fleece while touring his Volume 2 Hard Knock Life album. Jay would become their competitor next year when he started Rocawear. In February of 1999, Tony appeared on the cover of The Source magazine alongside other designers such as Willie Escobar Martinez of Esco, Ralph Reynolds of RP55, Carl Kanai, Maurice Malone. This was The Source's impression of who were the top streetwear clothing designers, and this magazine at the time was an incredibly powerful voice in hip-hop circles. By 2000, the clothing label had now branded into women's wear, and that year they received a slightly bigger endorsement than Jay-Z. Eminem wore Enyce at the 2000 Grammy Awards, which helped expand their streetwear from urban areas and out more towards the suburb and general America. Adam Zuckerman, who's VP of sales at Enyce, said, "Not only was the urban inner city kid buying it, but also the suburban kid wanted to be a part of it." In 2003, the label was incorporated by Liz Claiborne for $114 million. It was a solid investment for them as it was making $95 million annually. The label was also comfortable competing with Jay-Z's Rocawear and Diddy's Sean John, despite the fact that they did not have a major hip-hop artist officially promoting their brand. The deal with Liz Claiborne strategically allowed them to branch out with their women's wear. At the time, it was now 70% menswear but only 30% women's wear. so working with a women's wear brand would help bridge that gap. Evan Davis also admitted that although the Fila deal was successful, it did come with some issues. Speaking after the sale, he said, "Finances were a problem with Fila, but Liz Claiborne is willing to make the investment so we can grow properly. They support us and help us when we need it. We want to surround the brand with items to work closely with the clothes. I do not want to overshadow the apparel, which is why we are in this business to begin with." In the mid-2000s, hip-hop was now mainstream. Jay-Z, Eminem, and 50 Cent were just as big as any other artist in pop and rock music, and streetwear was also outshining other clothing types too. In 2004, Russell Simmons sold his streetwear line Fat Farm for $140 million and told the New York Times, "I was in a Macy's in San Francisco the other day, and there was Fat and Sean John and Echo and Rocawear and Enyce and Shady. Then in the corner I saw Calvin and Polo. I didn't see Tommy anymore." All those brands have gone ice cold. But soon after the Liz Claiborne deal, the founders of Enyce decided to leave the company. Tony, Lando, and Evan left to start up Parrish, a new urban label that also incorporated elements of California surfwear. In an interview with the New York Post, Tony said, "We tell our designers to go have some fun. When designers get caught up in whether a product will sell, you lose a lot of creativity." The Post then speculated that this quote may have been an indirect reference to why they left after Liz Claiborne took over, and there were stormy waters ahead for Enyce. In 2008, a global financial crisis hit, and almost every major company was affected in some way or another. For Liz Claiborne, they needed to strip down their operations in order to weather out the storm. So that year, Enyce was acquired by Diddy and seemed like a perfect fit. Diddy was a big name in fashion and hip-hop, and his expertise could give the label a much-needed boost. Liz Claiborne bought the label for $114 million in 2003, and 5 years later, they sold it for around $20 million. Talk about a fire sale. Explaining the incredibly low price, William McComb from Liz Claiborne said, "The unsettled economic environment and our commitment to properly resource and focus on other brands in our portfolio contributed to that decision." Once the deal was over the line, Diddy released a statement that said, "Enyce has been a very important player in the young men's sportswear arena for over a decade. I'm really excited to bring it into our portfolio of brands that already include Sean John and Zach Posen. I look forward to adding our expertise to an already hot fashion line." He added, "The current economic climate might be challenging, but we believe it's also an opportunity, and we're really excited to add Enyce to our lineup." And this was the key problem. With people losing their jobs or facing financial difficulties, they might hold off on buying new clothes, especially those that aren't the most popular anymore. In the 90s, labels like Enyce were a response to the designer labels ignoring the rise of streetwear, and fashion labels like Enyce, Fubu, Sean John, Fat Farm, Rocawear, and more were helping to fill that gap. By the 2010s, this gap didn't really exist anymore, and brands like Tommy Hilfiger, Ralph Lauren, and many others had finally embraced streetwear. That being said, by the 2010s, the baggy clothing, streetwear brand it became synonymous with had simply gone out of fashion. In the 2011 song Swagger Like Us, Jay-Z provided his audience with a bit too much information when he rhymed, "I can't wear skinny jeans cause my nods don't fit." In a 2016 Twitter argument with Wiz Khalifa, Ye tweeted, "I made it so we could wear tight jeans." Streetwear growing beyond the streets also had its drawbacks too. In 1999, Tony was asked about the rise of Fubu and said, "Fubu is going to lose its street essence as Little Johnny and Suburbia starts picking up its stuff." As these brands grew and grew, there was now a disconnect between itself and their roots, which possibly diluted the value of those brands. But throughout the 2010s, Enyce and other streetwear labels were nowhere near the clothing of choice for the world's biggest rappers. In 2016, Nia Porter wrote about the decline of urban clothing brands in Racked and said, "Somewhere down the line, rappers stopped donning Fubu hats and started looking back to Paris and Milan, to a legacy that was not created with them in mind." The biggest hip-hop stars of the 2010s like Ye, Drake, Travis Scott, Future, etc. were now wearing these brands, or at the very least not promoting them. As a consequence, the millions of fans who wanted to look like their favorite rapper were not pulling Enyce clothing off of the racks anymore. The label's online presence is an Instagram account which has not been active since 2016. A website was up and running, but looks to have been taken down since 2019. Diddy, who never shies away from promoting his businesses online, has never tweeted about Enyce once. Like all good things, Enyce looks to have come to an end, with no future anywhere in sight.